June 4, 1942. Somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, two of the world's greatest navies are searching for each other. One believes victory is already guaranteed. The other is desperately fighting for survival. For 6 months, Imperial Japan had looked unstoppable. Pearl Harbor, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island. One after another, entire nations had fallen before the rising sun. Japan's military had become the most feared fighting force on Earth. Its aircraft carriers ruled the Pacific. Its fighter pilots were veterans with years of combat experience. Its admirals believed they had mastered naval warfare better than anyone else. Across the ocean, America was still recovering from the humiliation of Pearl Harbor. Many believed the U.S. Navy had been crippled beyond repair. Even President Franklin Roosevelt understood that another major defeat could change the course of the entire war. Then, everything came down to one tiny island, Midway, a place so small that most Americans had never heard of it. Yet within just a few hours, thousands of lives would be lost. 4 of Japan's greatest aircraft carriers would disappear beneath the waves, and the balance of power in World War II would change forever. But here's the question. Why were the Japanese so certain they would win? What made one of history's greatest naval powers believe victory was guaranteed? And how did America pull off one of the greatest military upsets ever recorded? This is the incredible story of the Battle of Midway. To understand Midway, we first need to understand Japan. By late 1941, Imperial Japan wasn't just another country. It had become an empire driven by one goal: dominate Asia. Japan had spent decades transforming itself from an isolated island nation into a modern industrial power. Its military leadership believed Japan's future depended on controlling natural resources across Asia. Rubber, steel, coal. Without them, Japan's economy would eventually collapse. The problem was, most of those resources belonged to European colonies in the United States. As tensions grew, America imposed economic sanctions. Then came the oil embargo. For Japan, this wasn't simply an inconvenience. It was an existential threat. Military planners calculated that without new oil supplies, Japan's navy would eventually stop sailing. Its aircraft would stop flying. Its empire would slowly die. The leadership faced a terrible choice: accept American demands, or seize the resources by force. They chose war. On December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier aircraft launched one of history's most famous surprise attacks, Pearl Harbor. Within hours, much of America's Pacific Fleet had been damaged or destroyed. Across the United States, shock turned into anger. President Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. But Pearl Harbor was only the beginning. While Americans focused on Hawaii, Japan launched coordinated attacks across the Pacific: the Philippines, Malaya, Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, Dutch East Indies, Singapore. Victory followed victory. British forces surrendered. American troops retreated. Dutch colonies collapsed. Japanese soldiers seemed unstoppable. Military experts around the world began asking the same question: could anyone stop Japan? The answer appeared to be no. The mastermind behind the plan behind Japan's naval victory stood one extraordinary man: Admiral Yamamoto. Ironically, Yamamoto never wanted war with America. He had studied in the United States. He attended Harvard. He understood America's enormous industrial capacity. He admired American engineering. He knew something many Japanese leaders refused to believe: if war lasted several years, America would almost certainly win. He reportedly warned Japanese leaders that he could run wild for about 6 months, but after that, he could promise nothing. History would prove him right. Still, once war became unavoidable, Yamamoto committed himself completely. His strategy was brilliant: strike hard, strike fast, destroy America's fleet before American factories could begin producing ships faster than Japan could sink them. For 6 months, everything worked. Every operation exceeded expectations. Japanese confidence grew with every victory. Pilots became legends. Aircraft carriers became symbols of national pride. The Imperial Navy seemed invincible. But Yamamoto knew one dangerous fact remained. 3 American aircraft carriers had escaped destruction at Pearl Harbor: USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, USS Yorktown. Those carriers were still out there, waiting. If they survived, America still had hope. If they were destroyed, the Pacific might belong to Japan. That realization gave birth to one of history's most ambitious naval operations, Operation MI. The Invasion of Midway. Chapter 2 UI Midway? Many Americans today have never heard of Midway atoll. Looking at a map, it seems insignificant. A tiny collection of islands surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean. But military planners saw something entirely different. Midway was America's western outpost, an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Whoever controlled Midway controlled a large portion of the Central Pacific. From there, aircraft could patrol enormous distances. Submarines could operate farther west. Bombers could threaten Japanese operations. Yamamoto believed Midway represented the perfect trap. Attack the island, force America to defend it, then destroy the remaining U.S. carriers in one decisive battle. Once America's carriers were gone, Japan could negotiate peace from a position of overwhelming strength. The plan seemed almost flawless. More than 180 warships, hundreds of aircraft, 4 elite fleet carriers, thousands of experienced sailors. It would become one of the largest naval operations ever attempted. There was only one problem. America already knew. Chapter FOUR The secret war nobody saw while Japanese admirals prepared their invasion. A completely different battle was happening thousands of miles away. Not with bombs, not with battleships, but with paper, typewriters, and mathematics. Inside a secure basement at Pearl Harbor, American cryptanalysts worked day and night. Their mission: break Japan's most important naval code. The code was called JN-25. It contained thousands of encrypted messages. Each one looked like meaningless numbers. For months, the codebreakers struggled. Slowly, painstakingly, they began putting the puzzle together. One name appeared repeatedly: AF. But what was AF? Some believed it was Midway. Others weren't sure. Then American intelligence devised an ingenious test. Midway sent an uncoded radio message saying its water purification system had broken down. Shortly afterward, Japanese communications reported, AF is short of water. The mystery was solved. Was Midway. At that moment, everything changed. Instead of sailing blindly into an ambush, America would be waiting. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the hunters were becoming the hunted. As Japanese ships steamed toward Midway, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz faced an impossible decision. America's Pacific Fleet was still recovering from Pearl Harbor. 3 aircraft carriers stood between Japan and complete dominance of the Pacific. One of them, the USS Yorktown, had just been severely damaged during the Battle of the Coral Sea. Japanese intelligence believed the carrier would spend months in dry dock. But they underestimated one thing: American industry. When Yorktown reached Pearl Harbor, naval engineers examined the damage. The original estimate? 3 months of repairs. Nimitz didn't have 3 months. He barely had 3 days. Working around the clock, thousands of shipyard workers ignored exhaustion. They welded steel plates, repaired fuel lines, restored flight operations, replaced damaged equipment. What seemed impossible became reality. In just 72 hours, Yorktown sailed back to sea. It wasn't perfect, but it was ready to fight. Japan never imagined it would face 3 American carriers. That single miscalculation would prove devastating. On the morning of June 4, 1942, the Pacific appeared calm. But beneath the peaceful horizon, 2 massive fleets searched for one another. Japanese Admiral Chuchi Nagumo commanded 4 of Japan's finest aircraft carriers. Akagi Kagasoryu Hiryu. Together, they had attacked Pearl Harbor only 6 months earlier. Their pilots were veterans. Their crews were experienced. Their confidence was unshakable. At 4:30 a.m., Nagumo launched more than 100 aircraft toward Midway. Bombers, dive bombers, fighters. The attack struck the island hard. Explosions ripped across the airfield. Hangars burned. Aircraft were destroyed. But something unexpected happened. The Americans were still fighting. Midway's defenders transmitted an urgent message: second attack required. For Nagumo, the report created a dangerous dilemma. Should he prepare another strike against Midway? Or should he keep his reserve aircraft ready in case American carriers appeared? It was a decision that would haunt military historians for generations. Chapter SEV in chaos on the flight decks. Nagumo initially ordered his reserve aircraft rearmed with bombs for another attack on Midway. Bombs replaced torpedoes. Fuel hoses stretched across crowded hangars. Armor-piercing weapons were moved. Explosives stacked along passageways. Aircraft were pushed into position. Then, everything changed. A Japanese scout plane finally reported what commanders feared most. American ships had been sighted. Nagumo immediately reversed his order. Now bombs had to be removed. Torpedoes reinstalled. Fuel lines disconnected. Aircraft repositioned once again. Inside the hangars, confusion spread. Every minute mattered. The decks became crowded with armed aircraft. Fuel vapors filled enclosed spaces. Bombs and torpedoes lay exposed. The carriers had become floating powder kegs. No one aboard realized just how vulnerable they had become. Meanwhile, American carrier aircraft searched desperately for the Japanese fleet. Communication problems scattered squadrons across hundreds of miles of ocean. Fuel gauges dropped dangerously low. Pilots wondered if they were flying toward victory or death. The first American attackers to find the Japanese fleet were the torpedo squadrons. Flying slow, obsolete Douglas TBD Devastator aircraft, they faced impossible odds. Without fighter protection, they flew directly toward Japan's carriers. Waiting for them were the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters. What happened next was horrific. One after another, American torpedo bombers were shot from the sky. Pilots pressed forward despite overwhelming enemy fire. Machine guns tore through wings. Aircraft exploded. Engines failed. Some planes crashed into the sea before releasing their torpedoes. Others reached attack range, only to miss completely. Of the 41 torpedo bombers launched, only 6 returned. Entire squadrons were wiped out. One unit, Torpedo Squadron 8, suffered almost total destruction. Only one pilot survived. Ensign George Gay. Floating alone in the Pacific, surrounded by burning wreckage, he watched history unfold from the water. At first glance, the attacks seemed like complete failures. Not a single torpedo struck a Japanese carrier. But those brave airmen accomplished something far more important. They forced Japanese fighters to descend to sea level. They disrupted Nagumo's defenses. And they unknowingly opened the door for another group of American pilots approaching from high above 0.4 minutes that changed the world high above the battlefield. Almost unnoticed, American dive bombers finally arrived. They had been searching for hours. Fuel was nearly gone. Many pilots believed they were lost. Then, someone spotted a lone Japanese destroyer racing across the ocean. It was hurrying to rejoin the main fleet after attacking an American submarine. The American commander made a bold decision. Follow the destroyer. Minutes later, the Japanese carriers appeared below, completely exposed. Most of their fighter aircraft were still chasing torpedo bombers near the ocean's surface. The skies above the fleet were almost empty. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. American dive bombers rolled into their attacks. Sirens screamed. Pilots pointed their aircraft almost straight down. The ocean rushed upward. Japanese sailors looked skyward in disbelief. Then, the bombs began to fall. One bomb slammed into Kaga. Another exploded aboard Akagi. A third struck Soryu. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 fleet carriers were engulfed in flames. Fueled aircraft exploded. Bombs detonated. Fire spread uncontrollably through packed hangars. The ships that had terrorized Pearl Harbor had become infernos. In less than 5 minutes, Japan's naval supremacy was collapsing. By late morning on June 4, 1942, smoke covered the Pacific. 3 of Japan's elite aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were burning uncontrollably. But the battle wasn't over. Nearly 200 miles away, one carrier remained untouched. Hiryu. Its captain could see thick columns of black smoke rising on the horizon. Without radio confirmation, he already knew something had gone terribly wrong. Still, there was no thought of surrender. No plan to retreat. Japanese naval doctrine demanded action. If Hiryu could destroy the American carriers, the battle might still be saved. Orders were given immediately. Flight decks sprang to life. Mechanics armed aircraft. Fuel trucks rolled into position. Pilots climbed into their cockpits. One by one, Japanese dive bombers lifted into the sky. Their target? The USS Yorktown. Around noon, American radar operators detected incoming aircraft. The alarm spread across the fleet. Enemy aircraft approaching. Fighters scrambled. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The sky erupted into chaos. Despite heavy resistance, several Japanese dive bombers broke through. They descended almost vertically toward Yorktown. Sailors watched helplessly. Bombs exploded across the flight deck. Steel twisted. Smoke billowed into the air. The carrier slowed, then stopped. For Japanese pilots overhead, the mission appeared complete. They returned believing they had sunk another American carrier. But they were wrong. Once again, American damage control teams performed what seemed impossible. Within an hour, Yorktown was moving again. Power restored. Fires extinguished. Flight operations resumed. To Japanese reconnaissance pilots, it looked like a completely different carrier. They reported another American carrier had been found. In reality, it was the same ship. That mistake would influence every decision that followed. Believing a second American carrier remained undamaged, Hiryu launched another strike. This time, torpedo bombers. Flying low over the waves, they slipped through American defenses. 2 torpedoes struck Yorktown. The explosions ripped through the ship's hull. Power failed. The carrier listed heavily. This time, the damage was beyond repair. Captain Elliot Buckmaster gave the heartbreaking order. Abandon ship. Hundreds of sailors climbed into life rafts. Many believed their ship was lost forever. Days later, salvage crews attempted to save Yorktown, but a Japanese submarine discovered the crippled carrier. Several torpedoes struck the ship once again. On June 7th, USS Yorktown finally slipped beneath the Pacific. She became one of America's greatest wartime sacrifices. But her sacrifice had bought something priceless. Time. AS Yorktown fought for survival. American reconnaissance aircraft continued searching. One pilot finally spotted the last surviving Japanese carrier. Hiryu. The message reached Admiral Raymond Spruance almost instantly. Without hesitation, he launched every available dive bomber. Veteran pilots climbed toward the clouds. They knew this mission could end the battle. Hours later, they found their target. The scene below looked hauntingly familiar. Aircraft lined the flight deck. Fuel hoses stretched across the deck. Bombs waited beside aircraft. The same fatal mistake. American dive bombers rolled into attack. Bomb after bomb struck home. Massive explosions erupted. Flames spread across the hangars. Aircraft exploded one after another. The carrier became an inferno. By nightfall, all 4 Japanese fleet carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor were doomed. The backbone of Japan's naval aviation had been destroyed. Far away aboard his flagship, Admiral Yamamoto received the reports. At first, he refused to believe them. 3 carriers destroyed? Impossible. Then came another report. Hiryu was burning. Silence filled the command room. Months of planning? Gone. Years spent training elite pilots? Gone. The finest carrier force Japan had ever assembled? Gone in a single day. Yamamoto briefly considered continuing the battle. His battleships still outnumbered the Americans. But night combat carried enormous risks. The fleet was scattered. Communication had broken down. Most importantly, the carriers, the heart of his offensive power, were gone. Finally, he made the decision every commander fears. Retreat. The order spread across the Japanese fleet. Ships turned west. The Battle of Midway was over. Why Japan expected an easy victory looking back today? It's easy to ask, how could Japan have been so wrong? The answer wasn't arrogance alone. It was a series of assumptions. Japan believed America lacked the will to fight a long war. It believed Pearl Harbor had permanently crippled the U.S. Navy. It underestimated American shipbuilding. It underestimated American intelligence. It underestimated American determination. Perhaps most importantly, it underestimated time. Every month that passed favored the United States. American factories were already producing new carriers, new aircraft, new submarines, new pilots. Japan simply couldn't compete with America's industrial capacity. Midway exposed that reality earlier than anyone expected. Victory came at a terrible price. America lost. USS Yorktown destroyer USS Hammond, more than 300 service members, over 140 aircraft. Japan's losses were catastrophic. 4 fleet aircraft carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, hundreds of aircraft, more than 3,000 sailors and airmen. But numbers alone don't tell the full story. Japan lost something impossible to replace. Experience. Many of its finest naval aviators died during or shortly after Midway. Years of combat knowledge disappeared beneath the Pacific. Training new pilots took time. Time Japan no longer had. America, meanwhile, was only beginning to mobilize. Within 2 years, the United States would launch dozens of new aircraft carriers, thousands of aircraft, millions of tons of shipping. Midway didn't end the Pacific War, but it ensured Japan would spend the rest of the conflict fighting defensively. Military historians often debate the greatest turning points of World War II. Stalingrad, El Alamein, Normandy. But in the Pacific, one battle stands above the rest. Midway. Had Japan won, the course of the war could have looked very different. Hawaii might have faced greater danger. American offensives would likely have been delayed. The Pacific conflict could have lasted much longer. Instead, America seized the initiative. Just 2 months later, U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal. From that moment forward, Japan fought a defensive war it could never truly reverse. On the morning of June 4, 1942, Japan believed victory was inevitable. Its fleet was larger. Its pilots were more experienced. Its commanders had never suffered a major defeat. Everything pointed toward another Japanese triumph. But history rarely follows expectations. A handful of codebreakers. An impossible 72-hour repair job. The courage of torpedo squadrons that knowingly flew into near-certain death. A stroke of timing that placed American dive bombers over the Japanese fleet at precisely the right moment. Together, those moments changed the course of World War II. The Battle of Midway reminds us that wars are not decided by numbers alone. They're shaped by intelligence, preparation, leadership, sacrifice, and sometimes, by just a few extraordinary minutes. The 4 carriers that once launched the attack on Pearl Harbor now rest silently on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. Their wrecks are more than relics. They are reminders that overconfidence can be fatal, that information can be more powerful than firepower, and that even in humanity's darkest conflicts, the course of history can change in an instant, because sometimes, the fate of nations is decided in just 4 minutes.